Hey guys, it's Cory from CoryBakerFilmmaker.com, and I just saw Joker, written by Todd Phillips and Scott Silver, based on original characters by Bob Kane, Bill Finger, and Jerry Robinson, and directed by Todd Phillips. So quickly, just to sort of set up how I'm going to do this review, because this movie, more than most others, is like particularly spoiler ridden, and I don't want to ruin anybody's enjoyment of the film prior to walking in. So I'm going to do the theater. I'm going to do a little recap on like what people are talking about in regards to the movie without getting into any details of it. Give a rating, and then at the end, I will get into more of like my thoughts about the movie itself, because I want people to be able to enjoy this review however they want to take it in. So if you don't want spoilers, then after I give the rating, then you can check out and come back later after you've seen the movie and want to get my thoughts on what happened throughout it. Caught this flick at the AMC Universal City Walk. It's a very nice theater. Went to go see it in the IMAX, and the IMAX screen is very nice there. It's very touristy. I mean, so as far as like people from Los Angeles going to see a movie there, I don't know how much it works, because it feels a little bit like you're going to see a movie at Times Square. But the actual theater is great, and you know, if you're okay with sort of like the loud ridiculousness that comes with a theater at a tourist trap, then you should enjoy it. So the thing about Joker, and I feel like this is something that I haven't seen in a little while, is it feels like a lot of people are taking out their opinions on Todd Phillips and sort of this like, you know, the Hangover guys making a Joker movie, as opposed to sort of looking at it as its own individual piece and separated from the person who did it. And it's odd because, like, you know, people like Craig Mazin, who wrote Hangover with Todd Phillips, get to come out of their cocoon as like this new Chernobyl writer, like genius behind Chernobyl and stuff like that. But Todd Phillips doesn't get the same sort of respect of being the person who sort of broke open a new kind of darker version of the Joker. I think there's a lot of people who are rating this movie, especially like professional critics who are rating this movie based off of their personal opinions, and it just more often than not, it feels like I'm reading somebody's thoughts on Todd Phillips as opposed to the movie he made. That being said, the movie is not perfect, but where I think a lot of people's delineation on how they like the movie is going to be based off of how much you enjoyed the attempts that they made. The you know, a lot of times with a movie like this, it's about trying new things and trying to give us a different angle and a new take on what the Joker would be like. And I think that for the audacity of the chances that Todd Phillips took, it was an incredible show. For people who think that those choices are a little bit off base or not entirely, like they don't fit exactly like the way they wanted them to, then you're going to have a harder time enjoying this movie. Another thing is that like there was a lot of conversation about the violence, especially because the Aurora shooter had sort of taken like a Joker mindset into his mass shooting at The Dark Knight Rises. I never felt watching this movie that it was like supportive of gun violence, and this is like just sort of one of those things that's hard when a movie is hyped up like this, because people want to start inferring things about what it is or what it means prior to actually having seen it. So after having seen the movie, I didn't feel like this movie makes people want to commit heinous felonies. It's that I think that it should be more of a conversation about what we as a society need to take care of, and people like Arthur Fleck, Joker, played by Joaquin Phoenix in this movie, are in particular some of the people who are being forgotten, and the movie sort of makes a point of that, and I think it actually worked out really well for it. Let's insert a little bit of chaos. It's leaderboard time. Another one on the list for the AMC Universal City Walk. Would recommend. A little bit difficult to get to. We were definitely late for that movie because traffic was a nightmare. These are all things to consider when you go see a movie in Los Angeles. On to the movie leaderboard. I really enjoyed this flick, as I'll get into a little bit more here in a minute, but I think that it's something that everyone should see and decide for themselves. Because I will admit that the leaderboard is, for me, just a pure representation of how I sort of felt about the movie. And I know that movies that are more interesting to me and have subject matters that are more interesting to me are more likely to score higher because I have sort of an inherent bias of wanting to see things based off of movies that I like, or what I think I'm going to like, or people that I like. This is all sort of inherent in a system where it's one person's opinions and the rankings. But I really thought that this movie really went for it and succeeded a lot more than it failed. And for the pure audacity of that whole thing, I would give it a 8.9. Really, like, for me, one of my most enjoyable movies that I've seen since I've started doing this review. Certainly polarizing. I would not be surprised at all if I saw some sort of message from somebody going like, "Oh, this is the worst movie I've ever seen," because I totally would understand how somebody could get there with this movie. But for me, I thought it hit every single box it needed to, and then some. So that is it for the leaderboard. But for those people who have seen the movie, want to hear sort of the inside thoughts, the spoilers will begin now. Everybody else, go see the movie. Come check out this part because it's worth it. And I wouldn't mind the second view. So it's all right. So go with God. All right, I think we're alone now. I really enjoyed that there were a lot of things that were done in this movie that felt sort of like a 70s character study type of movie. And I mean, like, obviously a lot of people are making direct comparisons to like Taxi Driver and stuff like that. But I don't think it's so much that it's Taxi Driver for a new generation as it's just the type of movie that Taxi Driver is that isn't getting made anymore. And so it feels like a lot of different movies from like sort of the late 70s. I really like how this movie doesn't really seem to care about what the people who are watching it are thinking. Like it very much seems to be on its own timeline and pace, and it's not sort of like being pushed by any outside forces. Like I've made comments about DC movies that I've seen here on the leader or here on the reviews and outside of them that a lot of times it felt like there were network executives like there were studio executives in the room trying to like micromanage every little single part of the procedure. This movie did not feel that way. This movie felt like, here's Joker, go have some fun. It's very different from a lot of the DC movies that have been put out, and for that reason, I think very daring and very original for how they decided to take things. One thing in particular that I liked, and this is sort of a camera thing, I think Lawrence Shea, who did the cinematography on this, did a great job of constantly matching up the actions that was happening on the screen with the camera and how its state inside of the movie. So when Arthur is sort of feeling better about himself, like he feels like he's got his life not in order, but like certainly moving in that direction, then the camera's like steady on tripod, like just sort of like moving fluidly throughout the space, watching him move around. When things get a little bit more hectic in his mind, when he starts losing it a bit, then you start seeing like that handheld feel. And as it gets even more chaotic, like the nature of how unstable the camera is sort of matches the instability of the character itself. All of that I thought was really wonderful. I I love the shit out of the sort of like timeline inside of his mind. So like there was the whole thing where Zazie Beetz, like this girl who lives in the building with Arthur, and he starts having this romantic relationship with her, and it looks like his life is sort of falling into order a little bit. And then all of a sudden we figure out that it was all in his mind, like none of it was real. And the fact that this wasn't real too sort of like tears him down even more inside. And I just like from looking at it from the perspective of somebody who has some sort of diagnosed or undiagnosed mental disorder, I can see that touchstone in people's lives that I know who have difficulties in similar ways. And one of the things is sort of like hyper realizing what relationships are and like how much people care for them and stuff like that. So that felt very realistic to me watching Arthur go through that situation in this movie. The idea of the politics of like sort of like eat the rich, guillotines out kind of disruption of capitalism and the rich and everything like that sort of took place, I thought was really interesting too, because so often in life, the people who we sort of hold up as figureheads of movements and something like this are really the ones who have no desire to be the figurehead of the movement. It's other people's views that are sort of like painting themselves onto this, sort of deity figure within a movement. And the number of times where, as Joker, he sort of says, I don't care about politics. I don't care about this. But people have sort of devoted themselves to thinking that this is what this is all about. But still, like, taking advantage of them and still, like, using this mob mentality to benefit Joker is an interesting piece. I also, just as a language thing, love the fact that this movie is Joker and he keeps playing himself as Joker as opposed to the Joker, because I sort of feel like the Joker is something that happens once he gains the notoriety. Because, I mean, like, the superhero is Batman. But a lot of times in these movies, once he's built up his notoriety, he becomes the Batman. The Batman is coming to get us, that sort of thing. Like, it puts this extra, like, putting it on a pedestal-like nature. And I think that it just really nailed it as far as that's concerned. Couple other select thoughts. I think that just across the board, I feel everyone in the crew did a phenomenal job. The cinematography was great. The score was awesome and it was haunting. And the fact that it felt incomplete and like off note sort of added to the strenuous nature that you had with the reality of this film. I thought the editing was really great. I thought, honestly, I feel like everyone inside of all the cast did an incredible job, including Joaquin. I think Joaquin would be finding himself, for me, easily nominated for Best Actor at this point. And with only Leo in my mind as somebody who might be ahead of him. But I thoroughly enjoyed what he brought to this. De Niro being in the film sort of added more elements to this whole like taxi driver kind of mythos that this movie sort of puts through, which is fine. I thought he did a wonderful job as well. Robert De Niro constantly, to me, is one of those actors who can hide himself in the roles that he's playing. Like, I thought I saw him. I thought when I first saw the character on screen, I was like, is it Robert De Niro? But I wasn't entirely sure, and that, to me, is one of those moments where you're just like, you really find a way to hide yourself inside of these roles. So bravo to Mr. De Niro. I will say that to me, one of the shots that they sort of take in this movie that I could have done a little bit less with is the stuff with the Wayne family. Now, I like the idea of Thomas Wayne sort of being this not perfect figure, because in Batman movies we can only think of him as a perfect figure because he's the father who was murdered, and Batman does good, so therefore he must do good because the father was unrightfully taken. But I like that there's more complexity to him in this, and you're wondering whether or not he is actually such a good guy, and whether or not our opinions of Batman and where he takes his rise of vigilantism from, like, if it was all for naught, like if his father really wasn't a good guy to begin with. But then also this sort of like it crosses the line sometimes. So like when Arthur shows up at the Wayne Manor and Bruce is there on the other side of the fence, and like there's a scene like, you know, where he's like forcing the smile that's in the trailer and stuff like that. All very freaky, all very interesting, but perhaps at the end of the day unnecessary. That one just felt like it was just a little bit off. Like I could have probably done with less ties to Batman and the extended Batman universe. But, you know, honestly, it all, in the end, it all works. It's just like varying degrees of whether or not I think it worked to the best of its possible ability. And yeah, I probably would have done a little bit less Wayne if it was my movie, but I can't judge Todd Phillips on this one because it's incredible. Final thing, just sort of as like a piece of advice to Warner Brothers. The movies that we've had from the DC universe since the Dark Knight series have been disappointing for the most part. And I think that there is a real niche to be found here in the superhero genre of giving incredible directors, writers, performers ability to do things that aren't necessarily tied to like a franchise, because I think you would have a hard time getting Joaquin Phoenix to reprise this role on the same sort of regularity that, like, you know, Robert Downey Jr. would do for the Avengers. But having sort of standalone or, you know, small like trilogies, or, you know, just small multiples of the films, maybe with some ties to an extended universe, would be great. But I think that the more and more that DC tries to push this, like, you know, we had to get to Justice League as quickly as we could because they were already, Marvel was already Avengers, sort of like set you back. And I think the way to sort of regain some dignity and regain some prestige is to allow people to make more interesting character-based films based off of these. I mean, because at the end of the day, what people like so much about superhero movies is their modern-day mythology. And it feels like we're talking about old Greek gods and like the flaws and the characters and how they relate to one another, and is this the son of Zeus and blah blah blah. Like it's all part of a mythology that we have grown up with, and being able to tell these stories that we know and new in different ways is going to be the way that you really break through and create long-lasting films that are remembered fondly. And I think that when I look back on this time of superhero movies, when I'm much older, I will be thinking about it in terms of The Dark Knight and that whole trilogy and things like The Joker, because I think those are the ones that really sort of like set a new bar as far as like what we could expect from one of these movies. There are a lot of Marvel movies along the way that were really good. I thought Black Panther was very well done and it was very enjoyable, but they don't feel alike. And I think that the chances of possibly having something that is Oscar nominated or Oscar winning would come more from like a Nolan Dark Knight or a movie like Joker, as opposed to something like Black Panther, which, though very good, did not feel like it satiated the artistic integrity of something like the Academy Awards. Anyway, that is it for me. If you want more, you can go to my website, CoryBakerFilmmaker.com, Facebook.com/CoryBakerFilm, or at LegendsCB5 on Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. Definitely, I'm going to go see some more movies now that I'm wrapped on this feature. I'm going to see El Camino, so I will have a review on Thursday for El Camino, so look forward to that. Other than that, there's a bunch of cool things coming into theaters, a bunch of things already in theaters that I haven't caught up on, so I'm going to do that. But if there's anything in specific, leave a comment below, hit me up on social media, like, subscribe, share this video if you liked it, and yeah, that's it. So if you don't mind, I'm going to have a mental breakdown and see what happens. Maybe we'll get on TV.